On track, now we going way up. W's as easy as a layup. Working late, stay up. Counting all the way up. Counting blessings, yeah, you know we pray up. Way up, pray up. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. Keep the same energy. Work on being better when I'm 70. Your drip is just a water spring. You know I drip different, this the 7 C's. I deal with life different, make that limit squeeze. Went off for my style and identity. Better bounce back and get the cheddar cheese. I guess that's why they envy me. On track, now we going way up. W's as easy as a layup. Working late, stay up. Counting all the way up. Counting blessings, yeah, you know we pray up. Way up, pray up. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. I got his band like I'm Barry Bonds. Running through the money, but the money's long. I don't love it, but I need it, keep it coming on. Only friendly, me and friends, we don't get along. I put that on my name, that I put them on. I put myself on stage as they sing along. I might book a session, do 100 songs. I'ma let you hear them just to prove you wrong. On track, now we going way up. W's as easy as a layup. Working late, stay up. Counting all the way up. Counting blessings, yeah, you know we pray up. Way up, pray up. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. On track, now we going way up. W's as easy as a layup. Working late, stay up. Counting all the way up. Counting blessings, yeah, you know we pray up. Way up, pray up. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. Keep the same energy. Work on being better when I'm 70. Your drip is just a water spring. You know I drip different, this the 7 C's. I deal with life different, make that limit squeeze. Went off for my style and identity. Better bounce back and get the cheddar cheese. I guess that's why they envy me. On track, now we going way up. W's as easy as a layup. Working late, stay up. Counting all the way up. Counting blessings, yeah, you know we pray up. Way up, pray up. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. I got his band like I'm Barry Bonds. Running through the money, but the money's long. I don't love it, but I need it, keep it coming on. Only friendly, me and friends, we don't get along. I put that on my name, that I put them on. I put myself on stage as they sing along. I might book a session, do 100 songs. I'ma let you hear them just to prove you wrong. On track, now we going way up. W's as easy as a layup. Working late, stay up. Counting all the way up. Counting blessings, yeah, you know we pray up. Way up, pray up. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. On track, now we going way up. W's as easy as a layup. Working late, stay up. Counting all the way up. Counting blessings, yeah, you know we pray up. Way up, pray up. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. On track, now we going way up. Now we going way up. Now we going. Keep the same energy. Work on being better when I'm 70. Your drip is just a water spring. You know I drip different, just the 7 C's. I deal with life different, make that lemon squeeze. Went off for my style and identity. Better bounce back and get the cheddar cheese. I guess that's why they envy me. On track, now we gon' way up. W's as easy as a layup. Working late, stay up. Counting all the way up. Counting blessings, yeah, you know we pray up. Way up, way up. On track, now we gon' way up. Now we gon' way up. Now we going. On track, now we gon' way up. Now we gon' way up. Now we going. I got his band like I'm Barry Bonds. Running through the money, but the money's long. I don't love it, but I need it, keep it coming on. Only friendly, me and friends, we don't get along. I put that on my name, that I put them on. I put myself on stage and say sing along. I might book a session, do 100 songs. I'ma let you hear them just to prove you wrong. On track, now we gon' way up. W's as easy as a layup. Working late, stay up. Counting all the way up. Counting blessings, yeah, you know we pray up. On track, now we gon' way up. Now we gon' way up. Now we going. On track, now we gon' way up. Now we gon' way up. Now we going. On track, now we gon' way up. W's as easy as a layup. Working late, stay up. Counting all the way up. Counting blessings, yeah, you know we pray up. On track, now we gon' way up. Now we gon' way up. Now we going. On track, now we gon' way up. Now we gon' way up. Now we going. Keep the same energy. Work on being better when I'm 70. Your drip is just a water spring. You know I drip different, just the 7 C's. I deal with life different, make that lemon squeeze. Went off for my style and identity. Better bounce back and get the cheddar cheese. I guess that's why they envy me. On track, now we gon' way up. W's as easy as a layup.
Satchel Paige warms up his pitching arm.
Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, Cool Papa Bell. For years, it wasn't the talent of these athletes, but the color of their skin that kept them out of Major League Baseball, along with its hallowed record books. But now, no longer. Wednesday, Commissioner Rob Manfred announced Major League Baseball is, quote, correcting a long-time oversight in the game's history by recognizing the Negro Leagues as a major level of professional baseball. That means 28 years of statistics like home runs and RBIs from the 7 major circuits we know collectively as the Negro Leagues will carry the same weight as ones hit by Babe Ruth and Barry Bonds. Hank Aaron is one of the legends who played in both.
And what was it like playing for the Indianapolis Clowns?
To play in that league and to play with the ball players that I played with gave me an opportunity to do some things that I wanted to do.
It also means a fuller legacy for deserving legends. An aging Satchel Paige finally made it to Major League Baseball at the age of 42. But before that, he had already racked up almost 150 wins on the mound. And Jackie Robinson, who in 1947 broke the league's color barrier while wearing Dodger blue, now adds a season of statistics in Kansas City Monarch red.
Is it true that there was perhaps more talent in the Negro Leagues back then than there was in Major League Baseball?
I would not doubt it one bit. There was so much talent.
The change comes as MLB, like many other professional sports leagues, confronts issues of racial and social justice. Over the summer, to protest police brutality, teams and players sat out games. At the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City, they are celebrating this latest move toward equality.
It acknowledges those courageous owners and those even more courageous players who played this game against the backdrop of American segregation and excelled in it.
Those updated statistics will come at a later time. The Elias Sports Bureau will work on consulting the surviving records and box scores from the Negro Leagues games to add to the players' tallies. In Hood and Savannah earlier this year when I sat down with Hank Aaron, he after the cameras were off, he started naming guys who played in the Negro Leagues that I'd never heard of. But he contended that these guys that he was talking about were hands down better than any of the players in Major League Baseball back then.
Wow. So for every kid who's ever memorized all the baseball stats, they may have some new ones they're going to have to memorize.
There you go.
All right.
Yeah.
All right,
Late than never.
Yep.
Yeah, Craig,
Thanks,
you.
Craig.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Joel Goldberg, one of the Kansas City Royals television broadcasters, hosting the pre- and post-game show on Fox Sports, and being here in Kansas City, have the privilege on a very regular basis of having Bob Kendrick, president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, on our show, on for interviews. And this has been quite the week for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, for the history of the Negro Leagues. And quite frankly, and we'll talk about this in just a moment, it's been quite a 100th anniversary year in a way that no one could have ever expected, and really making the best, if not more, of such a difficult year for people all around the world. So I am so thrilled right now to bring in my good friend and president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And who does not call Bob Kendrick a good friend? Bob is going to join us now from, I believe, his home, where this will be about the 10,000th interview that he has done this week, but all worthwhile with this big news. Bob, how are you, other than probably needing a little bit of sleep?
You know, a little bit of sleep deprived, a little sleep deprivation, I guess you would say. But you know what? I'm absolutely elated. It has been one of the most amazing weeks for us in recent museum memory. You know, similar to what took place back in August when we had a National Day of Recognition and was 17-hour day for me. But this was even magnified because it was multiple long days of media interviews. That great clip from the Today Show is just an example of the kind of media that had reached out to us, wanted to get comment about Major League Baseball's historic announcement that took place on Wednesday. And so we're all excited. We're all proud of what has transpired, and like everybody else, anxiously awaiting to see how this is going to be integrated into Major League lore.
Well, we'll talk about that in a bit too, because you know as well as I do, and I think almost everybody tuning in knows, that baseball, more than any other sport, lives on its stats. Those stats tell history so much more, and there were elements of those stats that were not complete. Now they will be more complete. You know that a question that I always love to ask you every time you're on our show, and there's no one that's on our pregame show as far as a regular guest more than Bob. It's one of the great privileges for us being here in Kansas City to have the type of access to Bob, at least pre-Zoom calls and all that. Now anyone can have access to Bob, so he's doing 17 hours worth of interviews all day long. Before, we would just say, hey, come on, drive down to Kauffman Stadium, and we would have him. But the question that I always ask you, whatever event's going on at Kauffman Stadium, whatever tribute is going on, whatever special jerseys they're wearing, is I always say to you, what would Buck O'Neill think about this? I got two little bucks up here, one that'll sting, one that'll just bob and chill out, just hanging out. And I know there are a bunch more too, but what do you think Buck would think?
Oh, he would be proud. He would be proud. And Joe, and I say that from the standpoint that, and I've expressed this all week, the players in the Negro Leagues were never seeking validation from anyone. They knew how good they were. These were very proud athletes, and they were very self-assured athletes. They knew how good they were. They knew how good their league was. But most other folks did not know. And so they weren't seeking validation, But this is in its own way a level of atonement. It is a level of respect and finally long overdue proper recognition for what these courageous athletes had done in building the Negro Leagues and playing the game they love against tremendous social adversity. And so he, like some of the other Negro League player family members that I've talked to this week, they're very honored, they're very proud. And even myself, I had to stop and think about this. You know, when I talked to family members this week, many of their loved ones who played in the Negro Leagues have been long gone. And for them, this was so very, very special that they are getting this recognition, even though they're gone, but they're finally getting this recognition. And it's because Major League Baseball recognized it that others will now recognize what they did. So this just broadens that base. We've made a great impact at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in trying to help people understand how good these players were. But what Major League Baseball did essentially with one stroke of the pen, you know, or in this case was one stroke of the eraser, you know, erasing what had been done and rewriting it to make sure that it is inclusive. They did as much in one day as we've been attempting to do in the last 30 years in terms of broadening the base of those who now know about the history of the Negro Leagues. And hopefully they'll want to delve into it deeper. And ultimately they will become supporters of the Negro Leagues Museum. They will make their way here to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
Do you think it took a year like this year for it to happen, between the pandemic, between the racial injustice, which I've said many times and will say again, this was not the start of racial injustice. It was perhaps the start of more people fully understanding that this was something that existed on a daily basis, still does. Did that help push this forward or open doors? I mean, Major League Baseball, and I'm not asking you to speak for them, Bob, but Major League Baseball had to know that this at some point had to happen and should have already happened. I mean, it took them till 2020 to right a wrong of over 100 years. But how much did this truly unique 2020 help?
I think it played a role. I absolutely do. I think it played a role with everything that we've gone through and had to endure this year with the pandemic. You alluded to the kind of heightened awareness of social injustice because, like you're right, it's been going on all the time, but more people became more aware of it because it was so blatant and in your face. And you've got so many avenues now to see this. And so those things, I think, had a factor. I think the 100th anniversary celebration also played a role in this. And so I think there were a lot of things that led up to this. And so, Joe, for me, this was something that was kind of buried in the annals of Major League Baseball history. Honestly, I didn't even know about this 1969 commission that had blatantly disregarded the Negro Leagues and refused to accept them as a major league, and yet recognized all these other little old leagues, the Federal League and these other leagues that had no impact of any real significance on our game. And yet this league that had tremendous impact on Major League Baseball. And it was having impact, Joe, prior to integration. You see, the Negro Leagues were renting ballparks from Major League teams. And they were filling up those ballparks. And the Major League teams were getting either a percentage of the gate and likely all of the concession. And so this league, again, that was not considered major, was actually outdrawing many Major League teams in their own ballpark. And then we get to integration. 1947, Jackie Robinson, plucked away from the Kansas City Monarchs, goes into Major League Baseball with the Brooklyn Dodgers. This opens up this pipeline of perhaps the most tremendous talent to ever migrate into the major leagues at one time in the history of Major League Baseball, a league that I think has been around for almost 150 years. And that talent was plucked away again from this league that was considered not major. You know, so the impact that the Negro Leagues had on Major League Baseball is undeniable. It is there for everyone to kind of see, even though people are still surprised to learn that so many of these greats came out of the Negro Leagues. As we watch the video, and there's Henry Aaron. And I've said on many occasions, he's my favorite ball player of all time and the favorite person I've ever toured through this museum. He was my childhood idol. But when we stop to think about who the two greatest living major leaguers are today, very little dispute about this: Henry Aaron and Willie Mays. And both of them come out of the Negro Leagues. And I tell people, it's not that difficult to just stop and assess that if Hank Aaron and Willie Mays, who were young players when they left the Negro Leagues, are the two greatest living major leaguers today, and they come out of the Negro Leagues, then there just might be a possibility that there were some other players before them who were just as good or maybe even better than they were. And I know it's scary to think that anybody was better than Willie Mays and Henry Aaron. But when I hear my good friend Monty Irvin, who I absolutely admired and respected so greatly, when I hear him say, I played with Willie Mays, and he did. He mentored Willie Mays with the New York Giants, and I played against Henry Aaron. And neither of them are Josh Gibson. Again, it just makes you wonder, damn, how good was Josh Gibson? And now at least people will have an opportunity to gain some appreciation, I hope, of these unsung baseball heroes by what took place on Wednesday.
Well, it's really interesting, too, because there's so much history to the Negro Leagues. And, as you often tell me the story and so many others, these guys, as Rube Foster collected the owners at the YMCA in Kansas City, hey, if you don't want us to play in your league, we'll create our own. They knew, didn't they, that they were as good, if not better, as you talked about, than anyone in baseball, and proved it offseason after offseason when they were barnstorming around the country.
Yeah, now Rube Foster was exceptional, Joel. He was ahead of his time when he created the Negro Leagues here in Kansas City. As a matter of fact, just a stone's throw from my office, right around the corner at 1824 Purcell. The building still stands. It's the home of the future Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center. And so when he stood there on the steps of the Purcell YMCA on February 13th, 1920, and boldly proclaimed, "We are the ship, all else the sea." And that was his declaration of independence. He was serving notice to Major League Baseball that a new player had arrived on the scene to be reckoned with. And he was absolutely right. You had people like Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landers who would tell him, "Mr. Foster, every time your clubs beat our team, it gives us a black eye." So there was always this awareness of how good they were. And Joe, interestingly enough, and this gives you an indication of the visionary aspect of Rube Foster. When he created the Negro Leagues in 1920, he actually thought that he would create a league that was so dynamic that he would force Major League Baseball's hand to expand. And for those who kind of want to relate that to something, think about the NFL and the AFL, how they merged. Or for basketball fans, the NBA and the old ABA. And Rube was almost right. Instead, Major League Baseball ultimately took stars from the Negro Leagues, which coincidentally put the Negro Leagues out of business.
So how do you envision this all working? I know that we saw in that Today Show interview about Elias, and they're the experts on the stats. I'm not going to ask you to start counting all this stuff up, but this is really interesting because they chose this time period of 1920 to 1948, designated that the most important or significant. And so I want you to just share with us the insight that you have from baseball on that? And then also, it sounds like it was 7 different leagues that they're recognizing. And that's interesting too, because it's not the Negro League. It was the Negro Leagues in terms of the fact that there were a lot of different ones that I think either folded or expanded or whatever it was that featured these amazing players. So give us a little bit of feel for that.
No, and you're exactly right. And that's why the museum carries a plural form in its name, Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And so their recognition of even a league that we don't always recognize, that started a little bit earlier, because we've always had it down to 6, official league structures. They chose to go with 7, and they went to the time span of 1948. Now, honestly, I thought we could have gone into the early 1950s, because there were some tremendous stars who came out of the Negro Leagues in the early 1950s. Now, by 1955, the Negro Leagues were more or less minor league, because you had siphoned so much of this great talent out. And probably even more importantly, the Black fan base that had been so loyal to the Negro Leagues had now started to move over to Major League Baseball, because they wanted to see how their Black stars were going to fare. But, that's debatable on if it could have gone a little bit further. The effort that has gone in to try, Joel, to unearth these statistics, to try and formulate some quantitative data that could be used, that led us to this epic day, is tremendous. I commend them all. And I haven't seen the data. I don't know what the stats will look like. I just got to believe that there's still more out there that won't be included in this, because you are literally searching for a needle in a haystack, because quite frankly, if these teams weren't playing primarily in a city that had Black press, and it just wasn't a whole lot. As great as the Monarchs were, the Kansas City Stars archives were not that expansive as it looked at the great Kansas City Monarchs. And that was pretty much the case in most cities. The mainstream media just did not give them very much consideration. So now you're digging and you're trying to recreate this stuff. And every now and then, some of these communities where they might be playing a game would offer box scores. And so these official league games become that much of a greater challenge. So I commend all of those who've been working diligently to try to pull these numbers together. For me, the numbers just provide context. The numbers will never define the Negro Leagues by no stretch of the imagination. But for those, and we talked about it, and you talked about it earlier, what we love about our sport is that it is a beautiful game of comparisons and statistics. And that has always been the thing that people have kind of pointed to and said, well, you don't really have the statistics over in the Negro Leagues that to verify all of these feats that you always talk about, Bob. And so now these folks have kind of gathered enough of that data that I think will satisfy that voice. I hope it does. But it won't really paint a real picture for the Negro Leagues. This won't tell you that in 1943, J.O. Wilkinson bought an airplane so that Satchel Paige could fly around the country to pitch for other teams. That it ain't gonna tell you that. And then so Satchel could then get back and play with the Monarchs. So those numbers ain't gonna tell you that. So Satchel's greatness won't be measured by those 100 and whatever games that they may have found on him. It comes nowhere near, because the man was pitching almost every day. And so J.O. Wilkinson, he was basically a hired gun. He'd go fly somewhere, pitch for somebody else, and then fly back and join the ball club. That data ain't gonna tell you that. You know what I'm saying? And so we take that for what it's worth, and that's how I look at it, as context. But the real historical significance is in the acknowledgement and atonement and recognition.
A lesson that I think is important all the time, and I think a lot of the people that are tuning in right now understand how great these players were. But I like to do this from time to time. I love looking up the stats. And so take any 10-year period in Major League Baseball after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. Any decade or any 10-year period, I know that's arbitrary, but I just pulled one up right now, 1975 to 1985, top hits leaders in that 10-year stretch. Jim Rice is number 2, Cecil Cooper's number 4, Rod Cruz number 6, Dave Winfield 8, Dave Parker 9, Al Oliver 10, Bill Madlock 16, George Foster 17, Ken Griffey Sr. 19, Hal McRae 20. I keep going down to Chris Chambliss and Gary Matthews. I've left out, by the way, the Latin players too. We're talking any period in Major League Baseball after that color barrier was broken, and you will see, actually less today, that's a different discussion, and one that involves opening this game up for more talent. So we have more Mookie Bettses in the world, in the league, but clearly these guys fit back then. But now we get a chance to say, oh, look at Josh Gibson's numbers. Look at, and from what I understand, Bob, Willie Mays just is about to add some hits to his Hall of Fame career already. But that's got to have a lot of value, not to validate them, but to be able to look right there and say, yep, these were the best players in the world next to the ones that everybody was already seeing.
Yeah, no, and I think that's what we always wanted that to be part of the conversation. You see, here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, it has never been about us trying to make a determination on whether the players from the Negro Leagues were better than their white counterparts. What we wanted to do is provide you enough information about them so that when these conversations about the greats do emerge, that you don't exclude the players in the Negro Leagues. You know, Joe, people would always come up to my friend Buck O'Neill, and they meant well. And they would say, well, Mr. O'Neill, it's a shame that you didn't get a chance to play in the major leagues with the best players. And Buck would look at them and he would say, well, how you know I didn't play with and against the best players? Because you don't. You know, my good friend Joe Posnanski and I had this conversation the other day, and it's a perfect illustration of the natural assumption that we believe that if it didn't happen in the major leagues, then it didn't happen. Well, our friend, the great Ichiro Suzuki, you know, as he was preparing to come over to this country to play. Now, Joe, he had already put up 3,000 hits in Japan. And when he made his announcement that he's coming to play in the major leagues, what does everybody say? Well, you did that in that league, but you won't do that in our league. And what does he do? He comes back over here and puts up 3,000 more hits. And I really do think that's why Buck and Ichiro had such a tremendous bond, because Buck understood that. No matter how great they had been in the Negro Leagues, there were always the naysayers that said, well, you did that in a lesser league. You won't do that in our league when you get the chance to come over here. And what do? They put up major numbers. They go on to greatness. You know, we've talked about this before. From 1949 to 1959, 9 of 11 National League most valuable players were former Negro League stars. Folks, that's before we even start talking about Rookie of the Year. Yeah, and please understand that the American League wasn't nearly as aggressive as signing this black talent. The National League was far more aggressive, which is why the National League started dominating All-Star games and eventually World Series, because they were bringing this great talent up. I remember the great Bob Gibson, God bless his soul, said that he thought that the American League was a place where old players went to die.
Well, the world has changed for sure. I did see a question that came in there, a bunch of them. We'll see how many we can or cannot get to, but I wanted to throw this out there because I think a lot of people will wonder, and I'd read this in an article too, but just looking it up on Baseball Reference, Willie Mays' Negro League stats, and someone said, well, his home run totals increase, and everybody always wants to know about the home runs. But at the age of 17, I believe, Bob, playing for Birmingham in 1948, Willie Mays had 73 plate appearances, 61 at-bats, 16 hits, so that'll increase the total in this last year that'll be recognized of 1948. But he didn't hit any home runs, so he wasn't quite Willie Mays yet.
Yeah, and it's debatable about that, because I think Willie says he hit 1 home run that year. You know, he's 17 years old playing with a kid. He's a kid now playing with grown men. When Henry Aaron, and this is something he told me directly, he said, when I left Mobile, Alabama in 1952 to go join the Indianapolis Clowns, I didn't know if I was leaving home to go play with kids my own age or grown men. He was leaving to go play with grown men. You know, there is no kind of work your way up to this. You either got it or you don't. But what you'll hear both of them say, that older player in the Negro Leagues took them under their wing. They took care of them. They mentored them. And that's why you hear Hank Aaron talking with great reverence about the players. That's why you hear Willie Mays talking about Artie Wilson and Piper Davis. These guys literally wrapped their arms around those young players and said, we're going to take care of you. And when they did ascend to get to the major leagues, people always talk about whether or not the guys were angry about it. No. They were just as proud because they knew that they had helped them get to that next level, a level that they unfortunately were too old. Artie Wilson got to the major leagues, never got a fair chance. Artie Wilson was a tremendous hitter. He toiled in the minor leagues for years. Artie Wilson could flat out rake. Yeah, matter of fact, once we get a determination of how these stats are going to be integrated, he will now be the last player to hit 400. Artie Wilson, I believe, hit 408 in 1948. You know, so Artie Wilson could flat out hit. And he was hitting when he got to the major league, but he was really too old. And so he never got a fair shake. And so that was the plight of the Negro League player by and large, was that by 47, so many of the great stars were really beyond their prime. And so that young player who was maybe a budding star in the Negro Leagues becomes a star when they get to the major leagues.
Before I talk about this crazy year, one that could have just been catastrophic for the museum, and we know how much tragedy there has been out there and how much so many people are fighting right now, whether it be from a health standpoint, a financial standpoint, race as well. But we'll talk about that in a moment. But I just want you to paint a picture for those that haven't heard it. And a lot of us on the media side often say, if you're lucky enough to tour the museum when Bob is there, you're in for an extra treat because you get this great narration. But one of the stories I've heard you tell, or a picture that I've heard you paint, is what a Sunday was like in Kansas City, or fill in that city. But Kansas City was certainly one of the hubs and one of the big spots, or maybe even more vividly, the picture you paint on opening day, what that was like.
Oh, it was special. It was nothing quite like it. And this is not taking anything away from Major League Baseball. You know, the Yankees and those teams like that always drew well. But man, this was so special. You know, opening day here in Kansas City, a marching band would start right here at 18th and Vine. And they would march to 22nd and Brooklyn, where the stadium was. And Joe, behind them, you know, over 17,000 fans, standing room only, going to see their great Kansas City Monarchs. You know, the city of Kansas City had a love affair with the Kansas City Monarchs. And this wasn't just black folks. You know, white folks were coming out to watch the Monarchs as well. And because J.O. Wilkinson constantly had them on the road, a lot of people got to see the Kansas City Monarchs. You know, I don't know if people fully appreciate just how great the Monarchs were. You know, and Buck would always say, you know, when I got here to Kansas City, I knew I was coming to the heart of America. I never knew I was coming to the center of the universe, because Kansas City was jumping and 18th and Vine was jumping. And the Monarchs were right there in the middle of it, and everybody loved it. You know, these players, they were involved in the community. They were big stars. As Buck said, every time they went to dinner, the waitress was going to give you the best service. You were going to get the finest table. You know, everything that came along with being a star. And so, yes, they were stars within their communities. Church service would, on Sundays, church service, black churches would move the service time up an hour so fans could get over there to the stadium to watch the Monarchs, which Sunday usually was a doubleheader. And so, you know, if you know anything about the black church, you don't mess with service time. But the pastor was pretty smart. Now, he had the option. He could try to compete with the Monarchs, or he could move his service time up so he could make sure he get those ties. And he chose to move that service time up and make sure he passed the collection plate around in time so he can get those ties. And then those fans, dressed in full regalia, headed out to the ballpark to watch the legendary Kansas City Monarchs. But Joel, this could have been the Homestead Grades when they were both in the Pittsburgh area as well as in D.C., the Pittsburgh Crawfords, the Detroit Stars. It was really all of those kinds of teams who had long-standing success in the Negro Leagues. But it was a show. And for the Black community, there was this tremendous level of pride because this was something that was inherently ours. Now, it was shared with everybody else. And you've got to understand, at a time when it wasn't very popular to be Black, here was something that was bringing tremendous pride to this community, and they supported it, they endorsed it, and they absolutely loved it.
So your mission, I know, in carrying on the Negro Leagues legacy, carrying on Buck's legacy, I've said to you often that one of the big regrets I have in life is never having had the opportunity to meet Buck O'Neil, having moved here after he passed away.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's really a regret. I couldn't have controlled it. At the same time, I feel like because of the stories you tell, I feel like I know Buck very well. I feel like I could have a conversation with him. Because of reading the works of Joe Posnanski, I feel like I know what it must have been like to go to a dinner and see everybody wanting to get a piece of Buck O'Neil. But you have this privilege of passing on this legacy, and this, Bob, was supposed to be the year where all of the attention was on the Negro Leagues. And of course, as has happened to so many of us in so many walks of life, 2020 did not go as planned, and so much had to close and pivot, if we want to use that word, which everybody does. And yet here you were on August 16th, working a 17-hour day that started, I believe, in South Korea, so to speak, maybe not literally in South Korea. But tell me about that day and how what could have been a disaster really turned into something special.
Well, Joel, I think it speaks to the resilient spirit that we almost had to adopt. I tell people all the time, the players from the Negro Leagues never cried about the social injustice. They went out and did something about it. You won't let me play, I create my own. And there's something very, I think, innate about that. And so, as I've shared before, if you're going to be a steward of this story, you cannot wallow in self-pity. You just can't do it. It would be doing a complete disservice to all who call the Negro Leagues home. But let me preface that by saying that I would be lying to y'all if I tell you that I didn't do a little bit of wallowing. It took me a minute to get that spirit because we had put so much planning into this 100th anniversary celebration. And there was so much, Joel, riding on this 100th anniversary celebration. And if you recall, when we launched the celebration formally on February 13th of this year, on the actual 100th anniversary that the leagues were signed into existence by Rube Foster in the very building that this took place, the Paseo YMCA. And we've got Commissioner Manfred, and we've got representatives from the Players Association, the Honorable Quentin Lucas, Mayor of the great city of Kansas City, our good friend, 8-time Gold Glove winner, Royals Hall of Famer, now Jackson County Executive, Frank White is in attendance. Our new owner of the Kansas City Royals, John Sherman, is there in attendance with us. The Lieutenant Governor of the state of Missouri, Mike Kehoe, is there. So we've got this all-star delegation of distinguished guests there to commemorate this milestone moment. And Major League Baseball and the Players Association announced a joint $1 million contribution to the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And everybody know how excited I get about a check. Nobody gets more excited about getting a check than me. But we also rolled out our plans for a year-long celebration, which included a National Day of Recognition to the Negro Leagues. The first time ever, all major league teams on a single day were going to honor the Negro Leagues. And so as excited as I was, Joel, about the check, I was just as excited about this unprecedented event that was initially scheduled to take place on June 27th. And so we are off to a flying start. And then less than 30 days later, everything came to a screeching halt, just like that. You know, I didn't know anything about coronavirus. I'm not sure I know anything about coronavirus now, but I do know that it absolutely devastated all of our plans, as it has devastated not only this country, but the world. And so we knew that we were going to have to make some adjustments. So yeah, that was a little bit of wallowing for a little while, but I understood that I needed that resolve. And so now it's about, how can we salvage this year? What can we do in the midst of all this madness? And that was even before the George Floyd incident, which set off another powder keg. And I was like, okay, what can we do? And so the initial thought was, okay, let's see if we can't do something with this. We were going to do tip your cap in stadium. And it was clear that that wasn't going to happen. That was going to happen June 27th with fans and players. And so the idea came to do a virtual tip your cap to the Negro Leagues. And so I called my good friend Joe Posnanski, and who I oftentimes vet my crazy ideas with. And I say, well, Joe, what do you think about an idea to see if we can do a virtual tip your cap to the Negro Leagues? You know, have some, maybe a few dignitaries and some current and former ball players take a picture of themselves or a video and post it to a site that we would create, and see if we could get some, engagement in and around that. And so, Joel, I'm waiting for him to tell me, Bob, that is a ridiculous, that's a crazy idea. It'll never work. Well, he didn't say that. He said, Bob, I think that's a great idea. And I'm shocked. I said, you do? And so he calls his business partner, Dan McGinn, who is a tremendous communication strategist out of the DC area. And Dan thought it was a great idea. And Joel, the three of us went to work on what became an epic campaign that absolutely went viral. And when we launched, and this took place in less than 2 weeks, when we launched the Tip Your Cap to the Negro Leagues campaign on June 29th of this year, we launched the campaign with 4 U.S. presidents tipping their cap. President Obama, President Clinton, President Bush, and President Carter, General Colin Powell, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Billie Jean King, Stephen Colbert, Conan O'Brien. We went to Detroit, to Motown, and got the Temptations, and then athletes of all ilks, Henry Aaron and other great athletes of past and present got engaged. But man, when we literally went into outer space and got a tip of the cap from astronaut Chris Cassidy, I knew we had something pretty special then. And so that was amazing. And then August 16th, as you referenced, which became our national day after baseball resumed. And albeit it was not in stadium with fans, we couldn't do it with fans, it was still one of the most amazing days ever. The level of engagement in and around the Negro Leagues and the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum was at a level, Joel, that I'd never seen before. And as I was in the midst of that 17-hour day, I continually reflected on my friend Buck O'Neill, because as I've said before, when I met him, and I was a volunteer with the museum at that time in 1993, the first question, or one of the first questions that I posed to him was, what motivated you to want to build a Negro Leagues museum? And his answer was very succinct, but also very profound. Vintage Buck, so that we would be remembered. And on that day, August 16th of this year, they were being remembered in ways in which we had never even imagined. I don't think Buck could have ever dreamt that to see the Negro Leagues and the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum trending on social media was absolutely incredible. And it was so very special. And then you look at what took place recently with the passage of legislation to get a commemorative coin for the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in celebration of the 100th anniversary. The coin will be minted in 2022. And along with the prestige of getting the coin, there's a tremendous economic realization that could come along with it, as we could raise over $6 million if we can sell through these coins. And hopefully, if we can match those dollars that are generated, we could be talking about raising over $12 million for this museum. That is a game changer, because what we are looking forward to doing is setting the museum up for long-term sustainability so that it will operate in perpetuity long after old Bob is gone. You know, that somebody else will have a chance to come in and hopefully just not mess it up. They won't have to work as hard as I did, but just don't mess it up. Yeah. And then, of course, in the year with what took place on Wednesday is why we say it's been such an incredible year in spite of the challenges that we've seen and had to endure, closing for 3 months from March 14th to June 16th. So, you know, it is cause for celebration for us.
If you're really carrying on that Buck O'Neil legacy and you're now referring to the future you as good old Bob, I know you're carrying on that legacy because it's always good old Buck. But I had a couple of thoughts that popped into my head here. One was I was trying to envision Buck O'Neil seeing all of this in the context of social media, because, of course, he really didn't experience that at the level that it's at now. So I know Bob oftentimes is sitting late at night tweeting out on his Twitter account and Instagram. Bob's very active on social. So I'm trying to picture, you know, Buck here sitting on a phone or something like that on social. But I also know he would have enjoyed every moment of that. And he still is, in the sense that you talk about raising money, millions of dollars with that coin. I mean, just this guy right here alone, who is not a silent bobblehead, he sings.
No.
Talk about how quickly that escalated.
You know, it was a great idea by Ben Aiken, who at that time was with Rural Charities. He's now moved on. And Ben called me and says, Bob, we got this idea. We want to do a singing Buck O'Neil bobblehead. And can you help us get the rights to use Buck singing from Ken Burns' documentary, Take Me Out to the Ball Game? Which, again, every time I hear Buck sing that, it just gives me chills, you know, because the joy that he had. And Ken graciously allowed us to use that was taken directly from his epic documentary on the history of baseball. And it was Ken that catapulted Buck into national stardom, because he was so compelling narrating during that documentary. And we put these things together, and thanks to the support of a lot of people who bought a lot of Buck O'Neil singing bobbleheads, the Royals just sent us a check for $100,000. And that was, needless to say, music to my ears. Keep singing, Buck. Just keep on singing, man.
It's beautiful. And just like that, I know so many people want to be involved. And you talk so often about preserving the memory, the legacy, because we will get to a point where eventually there won't be any living former players of the Negro Leagues, but that extends beyond that. And we saw former Negro Leaguers or very dear friends of the museum that passed away amidst this tragic year. Amidst the successes of the Negro Leagues Museum came a lot of heartache too, right?
Joel, it's been one of the most challenging years for a lot of reasons, but including the tremendous loss that we've experienced to those who were very close to us. You know, we've had so many legendary ball players pass away this year that some of the guys who died early in the year, we have a tendency to forget. We forget about Bob Watson, who was a dear friend. We presented him with the Jackie Robinson Lifetime Achievement Award several years ago. And my good friend, Jimmy the Toy Cannon Wynn, you know, who we lost earlier this year. And then the great actor, Chadwick Boseman, who we spent 2 glorious days here in Kansas City when we hosted what many regard as the second largest Hollywood screening red carpet screening of the film 42. Well, again, in Los Angeles, they do that all the time. But in Kansas City, we didn't get to do that too often here. And Chadwick was here, and it was on the red carpet that he presented me with the jersey. If you recall, for those who watched the film, in the early scenes of the film, it depicts Jackie as a member of the Kansas City Monarchs. And so he's wearing a 1945 road jersey. And they presented that jersey and cap to me on the red carpet. Of course, it hangs proudly inside the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. It was special then. It's even more special now since we lost this incredible talent, 43 years old, gone way too soon. But what a tremendous body of work he left us. And I knew he was special, Joel, because I could see the way Mrs. Robinson looked at him. He was, see, she never referred to him as Jackie. He was Jack. He became Jack in that movie. And you could see it by the way that she looked at him. And so that was a devastating loss for us, again, because he was so young. And then you start talking about the likes of my dear friend, Lou Brock, who was basically Buck O'Neill's surrogate son. And so Lou has spent so many times here with us, hanging out with us, being here when Buck was alive. And even after Buck passed away, he was always present. And when his wife, Jackie, called me and asked me if I would speak at his funeral services, it was obviously a tremendous honor. But man, it was one of the most difficult things I ever had to do. You know, as I'm driving to St. Louis, I am filled with trepidation. I really did not want to do it. But again, I'm so honored that she had asked me to do it. And it was very eerily similar to when Buck passed away. And when Buck passed away in 2006, we had made the decision to have his public viewing here at the museum on the Field of Legends. And we had made the decision, a very difficult decision, on whether or not we were going to open the coffin. And we decided to open the coffin to allow people to pay their proper respect and say goodbye to Buck. And I'm not really feeling this. I was a little nervous about this. And so the public was supposed to start, I don't know, about 7 o'clock that morning. And I got there early before everybody else did. And I wanted to go in and say my goodbyes to Buck. I'm real nervous about this. But then when I went to see him, this overwhelming calm came over me. And it was almost as if he was saying, Bob, it's going to be okay. Everything going to be okay. And when I went into the church and went over to see Lou, it was that same overwhelming calm again. And so when it was my time to speak, I got up in the pulpit and I just spoke from my heart. No, I never used any notes. I just spoke from my heart. But one of the things that I shared with them, because they wanted me to put it in a kind of a historical Negro Leagues context. And when Lou Brock broke the all-time single season stolen base record, who was there to greet him? The legendary Cool Papa Bell. And Cool Papa Bell and Lou had become great friends. When Lou got traded over to St. Louis, as we all know, in one of the worst trades in baseball history, for a hurt arm pitcher named Ernie Broglio. When Lou gets traded over to St. Louis, who's the first person to reach out to him? Cool Papa Bell. Now, Lou knew who Cool Papa Bell was, but he had no idea that Cool Papa Bell knew who he was. He's just a young player. And Cool started to mentor Lou. He taught him these nuances about base running and base stealing that Lou said, I ain't never heard that before. He said, Cool, I ain't never heard that before. I ain't see that in the book, because Cool said it ain't in the book. And they become great friends. So when Lou breaks the all-time single season stolen record, Cool is there to greet him. They get a mic to Cool. They pull up the bag out the ground. Cool's got the bag in his hand. And he said, Lou, we're going to give you this base, because if we don't give it to you, you're going to steal it anyway. And so, and so, you cherish those memories that you have. And then we lose our friend, Bob Gibson. For Cardinal Nation, they lost two of their iconic stars within 2 weeks of one another. And then right after that, we lose the great Joe Morgan. And Joe was such a dear friend of ours. Joe Morgan, when Buck died in 2006, Joe left his playoff duties. He's broadcasting, left his playoff duties to come to Kansas City to MC Buck O'Neill's public funeral service. Yeah, that's how close we were to Joe. And then, of course, just last week, we lost the great Dick Allen, who we inducted into our Hall of Game in 2018, who absolutely should be in the Hall of Fame. And then our good friend, the great Charley Pride, on this week. Matter of fact, you were here, I think, when we were, you had brought me a copy of your book. And that's when I got word that Charley had passed. And of course, now you instantly go into action because you got to talk to people and everybody wants to talk. And a lot of people didn't know that he had played in the Negro Leagues. Yeah, the Negro League baseball was his first love. The baseball was his first love. He wanted to play baseball, and he was actually a pretty good ball player. He was a pitcher in the Negro Leagues for the Memphis Red Sox and then later the Birmingham Black Barons. And Joe, he actually made it into the New York Yankees organization before he hurt his arm. It was after he hurt his arm that he fell back on a pioneering country western music career, some 70+ million albums sold later. As I always tell our guests, we should all have a fallback career like Charley Pride. And as I used to always tell Charley, I said, Charley, I know you love baseball, but you made a whole lot more money singing than you would have ever done pitching. And he was one of the founding members of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. And whenever he made an appearance here, a guitar just seemed to always show up. Somebody had a guitar with him, and he never missed an opportunity to take it and play it. We were playing in the 2013 Buck O'Neill Golf Classic. And my good friend Rick Sutcliffe was one of our special guests, and Charley Pride is there. And so when we finished the round of golf, we were getting ready for the awards banquet. And Sut just happened to have a guitar with him. So Sut gets up with the guitar. He's going to perform for Charley, and which was a terrible idea, but it was actually a great idea because Sut was so bad. Charley took the guitar from Sut and then commenced to go into an impromptu hour-long concert at the Buck O'Neill Golf Classic Awards and Banquet. And it's just one of those many memories that I have of him. It was a sad day to lose him. And we know that death is a part of life, but it never makes it any easier. So, yeah, it's been a very difficult year from just the sheer standpoint of losses of friends of ours.
Well, there's so much that people could see when they come to the museum. And I know that for the people all around the country, if not the world, that are tuning in right now, we so often see, you hear it every day, if I ever get through Kansas City, if I ever come through Kansas City, I want to stop by. The thing that I always say is that the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum is not a museum about baseball. It's a museum pertaining to civil rights, pertaining to U.S. history. Yes, there happens to be a lot of baseball. There happens to be, as Bob alluded to, music, not just the Charley Pride factor. Geddy Lee is a huge supporter of the museum. Who would have known? A rock star from Canada, a white rock star of Jewish descent from Canada, who has this amazing baseball display in there. So there's so much that it's one of those things where there's basketball influence. I've told you before, I could sit and watch video of Goose Tatum, who went on to be a Harlem Globetrotter, right? Sit there and just pick it at first base. You can get lost in the museum over and over again. So I can't encourage everyone enough to just come and check it out. It's the type of feeling and experience, in my opinion, that I had when I went through the Martin Luther King Museum in his home down in Atlanta. You just feel something. And I know that you get a chance to feel that every single day. So, Bob, before we wrap up, and we'll wind things down here in the next 5 or 10 minutes. Otherwise, as people know, between you and me, we could go 20 hours here. And at some point, you need to be able to catch your breath and maybe take a little bit of a nap. But I wanted to pass on some of these comments that are coming in, because I think you probably deal with this every single day in the best of ways. But just reading a few of these, the legacy or the attachment, the family members, the people that are saying, wait a minute, my roots go back to so-and-so player. So Daryl Matthews says, I think it's fantastic, and it's about time my dad, Fran Matthews, played for the Negro Leagues Newark Eagles. And then Joy Edwards Haynes, my dad and grandfather played in the Negro Leagues. And then Bill Healy, Daryl, did your dad play with my dad's favorite New York Giant, Monty Irvin? Jane Tinker says, my husband's grandfather is Harold Tinker from the Pittsburgh Crawfords. Sophia Drew McGrew, my cousin is Earl Mickey Taborn.
Yes.
I've got to imagine that you hear these stories and these names all of the time, and people, whether they're family members, friends, or just learning, are craving more information.
Yeah, no, and it's always heartwarming for me, the connection with the families, and those sometimes discover their connection. I've had it happen where family members have been in here and then seen a loved one that they didn't know had played in the Negro Leagues, and they are literally in tears because they are so proud. And that's what we go back to the beginning of our conversation. And while there may be those who weren't necessarily in favor of what Major League Baseball had done, or whatever, for whatever reason, you cannot lose sight of what this means for the families of those who played in the Negro Leagues. And so it just fills me with great joy that they share so much pride in what their relatives had done by being a part of these leagues. And so when we started this museum 30 years ago, Joel, we knew then that this was literally a race against time, that the people who made this history, it wasn't a matter of if they were going to be gone. It was simply a matter of when they were going to be gone. And even the people who saw them play, we were going to lose them as well. And so every time we lose a Jim Robinson, who wasn't a household name in the Negro Leagues, but was a graduate of North Carolina A&T, who got into the Cardinals organization, who was the star of this year's Toyota commercial, national TV commercial, that he got to see himself being recognized, and sadly passes away earlier this year. And so it is always special. And it also puts added weight on the museum to try and document as much of this history as we possibly can so that we don't lose it, and to continue to make sure that we position this organization that it will be around for years and years and years to come, so that future generations can come here and learn this incredible chapter of baseball and American history. But as I've oftentimes talked about this, not only learn it for its tremendously rich educational value. This is a lesson, and you can't get this in school, but its inspirational value is just as meaningful as the educational value. Because I tell my guests all the time, if you walk away from this experience when you visit the Negro Leagues Museum with nothing other than this, what the Negro Leagues teaches us, folks, is very simple. In this country of ours, if you dare to dream and you believe in yourself, you can do and be anything you want to be. They dared to dream of playing baseball. They had no idea they were making history. They didn't care about making history. They just wanted to play ball. But the pride, the passion, the perseverance, the determination that they demonstrated in the face of adversity. And again, our story is not about the adversity. It's about what they did to overcome the adversity. That's the real story. And again, that story transcends race, transcends age, and it transcends gender. And that's why this museum is so important. And that's why Major League Baseball's recognition was so important. It wasn't about validation. No, it wasn't about validation. It was about atonement. And that's why I applaud Commissioner Manfred because there were a litany of other commissioners that didn't do this. No, in essence, y'all, he was our Happy Chandler. He was our Happy Chandler. Happy Chandler stood there with Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson to allow Robinson to break the color barrier because the other owners voted against him. And Chandler stuck out his neck to do what was right. And while the commissioner has likely gotten a lot of stones thrown at him from those who are in disagreement with his decision, he did what was right. Yeah, and as it's always the right time to do what is right, even if it's years down the line. So we should not be nitpicking at every little aspect of this and trying to determine what Major League Baseball's motivation may have been for doing this. The commissioner did the right thing. Yeah. And he was willing to stand there and take whatever heat came his way. And I commend him for doing that. All of us at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum are tremendously proud of what this means for the Negro Leagues. And it was a tremendous day of reckoning for all of us who call the Negro Leagues home.
Before we wrap up, I want to talk about 2021. One of my favorite things of the museum is the ending of it when you walk into the gift shop. I know I sound like I'm selling here, but I'm usually the one that
keep selling, man.
I know. I'm usually the one buying. Nowadays, I have to, whenever I leave, I have to walk out of there either with a new hat or a new mask. I think I have every single mask you guys have right now in every single color. But I was wondering, is this the hat that we're wearing right now?
That is. That's a 1942 Kansas City Monarch cap. And for those who saw the streetcar, I didn't even mention the streetcar that we unveiled on Buck O'Neill's birthday. Buck has his own streetcar. You know, we got a barnstorming bus. We got a fleet of bicycles. Buck earlier this year got a U.S. Navy ship, USS Kansas City, number 22, ship number 22. And the galley is named for Buck. So Buck got virtually every mode of transportation except an airplane. So I guess I need to call Southwest and see if we can't get Buck an airplane too. But that is the 1942 Kansas City Monarch that you are wearing, that I am wearing. That was Buck O'Neill's favorite team. Yeah, they won the Negro League World Series in 1942. And what a lineup, man, that they have. 3 Hall of Famers in that lineup. Satchel Paige, Hilton Smith, Willard Brown. But the second tier of guys, you can make an argument that they should be in the Hall of Fame. Ted Strong, who I tell people all the time, was Dave Winfield before we ever knew who Dave Winfield was. He's 6'7", 6'8", played every position except for pitch and catch. He's 6'7", shortstop, you know, and would go on to star for the Harlem Globetrotters. He's there. This was a dynamite team, man, and they swept the powerful Homestead Grays in 1942. The Homestead Grays had Buck Leonard and Josh Gibson batting in what was a juggernaut offensive lineup, but that pitching staff for the Monarchs shut them down. Satchel unbelievably won 3 of the 4 games.
Looking over Satchel's numbers, and the only uncertainty, well, there's some uncertainty in some of this, is his age. Nobody's going to figure that one out. But did he play for Homestead and Kansas City in that year, 1942?
Well, see, like I said, he was being rented out. Satchel was playing for everybody.
Okay, that makes sense. You know, I think that just the stories on Satchel alone can take a lifetime to tell, because there's some very, I think, charming ambiguity to it, because you don't quite always know. You just know how good he was.
You know how good he was, but we have no idea how old he was. You know, so while they say that he got to Cleveland when he was 42, he was 42 if you believe that he was born in 1906, which I absolutely do not believe. I can tell you now, the man that died here in 1982 had seen 76 a long time ago. Satchel was likely born into the early to mid 1890s in Mobile, Alabama. And like most of that era, nobody's born in a hospital. Everybody's born at home to a midwife. And so that birth record was typically kept in the back page of the family Bible. And so it might be weeks, days, months, years, if ever, it was actually taken to the courthouse and officially recorded as a birth record. So there were a lot of folks, particularly Black folks born in the Deep South, who did not know how old they were. And according to Satchel, the goat ate that page out the Bible. So he had no idea of how old he was, and he would whimsically pose the question, how old would you be if you didn't know how old you were? And it was the age-old mystery around the old man. But I can tell you now, no one did it better than Satchel Paige. Now, you may make an argument that there were some who were as good as Satchel Paige, but no one did it better than Leroy Satchel Paige. Yeah, he was the complete package, Joe. He had everything. You know, there are guys who were great pitchers, but Satchel had everything. He not only had the great stuff, he had the charisma, he had the longevity. Everybody wanted to see this old man pitch. That's why J.L. Wilkinson was hiring him out. Yeah, you don't know any too many guys that got their own plane so that they could go make appearances elsewhere and come back. That's the kind of star that we're talking about when we talk about Satchel Paige.
The other element to the Negro Leagues, I'm getting off topic here, we'll wrap it up here in a few moments, is the fact that, I know I'm just getting Bob wound up now, and I've heard, as I tell people often, I've heard many of these stories 100 times, and I certainly expect and hope to hear them another 100 times because they never, ever, ever get old, and I don't try to tell them the way you do because I couldn't do it. But to me, you had to have talent to be in the Negro Leagues. You had to have an element of flair, some more than others, and you couldn't just be Leroy. You couldn't just be James Thomas. There had to be a nickname, right?
No, man, if you didn't have a great nickname, you can't play. You must not be very good. You know, all the guys had great nicknames. And of course, Satchel. When I tell people that his name is Leroy, people are like, who are you talking about? Because his name became so iconic. Everybody knows Satchel. Nobody knows James Bell, but everybody knows Cool Papa. You know, nobody knows John O'Neill, but they all know Buck. You know, and so when your nicknames become so iconic, and it was part of the mystique of the Negro Leagues and the show and the daringness and flash that made the Negro Leagues so tremendously entertaining, and why fans flocked to those games to see those games, because the characters themselves, no pun intended, were colorful. They really were. And so you wanted to see what they were going to bring to the table. You know, as Buck would say, you can't go to the concession stand because you might miss something that you ain't never seen before. You know, and that's what they brought to the game. Now, the major leaguers kind of frowned on that. They say, oh, they just showboating. They just showboating. You know, Joel, the guy would dive in the hole, flip the ball behind his back to start the double play. Today is a Sports Center top 10 highlight every night of the week. But when they did it in the Negro Leagues, the major leaguers say, oh, just showboat. Well, as Buck would say, number one, if you got something to show, show it. Yeah. And then he also would say, it's only showboating when you can't do it. And so,
you know, I guess that having a name like Ted Radcliffe just wouldn't explain what Mr. Radcliffe was able to do and how multi-talented he was.
Had to be double duty Radcliffe, which I think is also one of the great nicknames of all time. And of course, double duty earned his nickname when the great sports writer Damon Runyon saw Duty catch the first game of a Satchel Paige shutout. Duty pulled off the catcher's gear, took the mound, and then threw a shutout in the second game of the doubleheader. Runyon said that he was worth the price of 2 admissions. He was double duty until the day he died in 2005 in Chicago at age 103. And as I tell the young players who come over to visit the Negro Leagues Museum, the young Major League ball players, and sometimes, Joel, the coaches will say, well, My guys were crying about a late night charter flight. A late night charter flight. And then they'll get here, and there's a beautiful quote from Double Duty that says, every 4th of July, we would play 4 games in one day. I would pitch 2 and catch 2 and sleep 35 minutes in between games. All of a sudden, that late night charter flight don't seem so bad after all.
Anybody ever ask you about Norman Thomas Stearns?
Oh, Turkey the gobbler. Yeah, the gobbler, man. You know, if you want to gain a perspective of how good the gobbler was, Cool Papa Bell says, if Turkey Stearns is not in the Hall of Fame, no one should be in the Hall of Fame. He is one of the great hitters in Negro Leagues history, a tremendous outfielder. And of course, he earned his nickname Turkey because of the way that his arms flapped when he ran. And he had kind of a pigeon-toed batting stance. So everything looked awkward, but Turkey could literally fly. You know, he's one of the best defensive outfielders in the Negro Leagues and one of the greatest hitters of all time. Spent most of his career with the Detroit Stars, but also played here in Kansas City as part of some of those great Monarch teams as well.
And then maybe not everybody had a nickname, but I suppose that when you could do what Joshua Gibson did, you just call him Josh Gibson.
You call him Josh. You call him Josh. They call him Big Fella, you know, and you just left him alone. Because I tell people, man, you know, just visualize. If you want to try and visualize the physique of Josh Gibson, just think Bo Jackson as a catcher. Folks, that's Josh Gibson. As Buck would say, he's about 6 foot, about 220. As Buck would say, neat in the waist. I'm still trying to get neat in the waist. I ain't there yet. I'm still a work in progress. Big, powerful forearms, broad chest, big, powerful thighs, and great eyes. Great eyes. Buck O'Neil would describe Josh in this manner, that he had the eyes of Ted Williams and the power of Babe Ruth rolled into one dynamic package. His outs, as we say in the sport, were loud outs. This is well before we knew anything about a shift. The third baseman and the shortstop were damn near in left field when Gibson came up there, man, because you ain't creeping in on Josh because you could get killed. They basically said, Josh, if you want to bunt it, you can have it. There wasn't a ballpark that could hold Josh Gibson. He hits a ball completely out of Yankee Stadium. And for me, that's not the most incredible feat. He is one in the Polo Grounds that they estimate to travel over 600 feet. And I still don't think that's the greatest feat. For me, he hit a ball in the upper deck, right field upper deck at Yankee Stadium, one-handed. He is food on a changeup and literally reached out with one hand and hit it in the upper deck, right field upper deck at Yankee Stadium. And Gibson was this very soft-spoken, jolly giant of a man. And they say as he's circling the bases, he just giggling. Because I don't think he knew his own power. You know, he was the kind of guy, Joel, that was so strong. If he poked you on the arm, it hurt. You know, but he didn't know he was hurting you. That's the kind of power we're talking about with Josh. And I tell people all the time, whether it was in the Negro Leagues, whether it was in Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Cuba, wherever Josh Gibson played, Josh Gibson hit, and he hit for power. And the one thing about the games in Latin America, those records were very well kept. Yeah. And they paint a great picture of just how prolific Josh Gibson was.
Okay, last player I want to ask you about, then we'll talk about what's coming up for the museum in 2021. And I shouldn't need to justify this, but I feel like every time I interview you in this type of format, I have to ask you about the light switch, because it just makes me smile every single time. Anyone that's watching right now that has heard it, you'll enjoy it again. If you haven't heard it, you're in for a treat. And if you're an electrician looking to maybe mess with someone a little bit, perhaps you could take a lesson from Cool Papa Bell, Bob.
Yeah, no, Satchel and Cool were teammates, and on this particular instance, when they traveled, they were roommates. And on this particular instance, old Cool gets to the hotel room before Satchel does. And he walks in the room, he flips the light switch on. There's a delay before the light goes off. He flips the light switch off. There's a delay before the light goes off. So Cool Papa says, uh-huh. When Satchel gets to the room, Cool is waiting on him. Roomie, I'm so fast, I can flip this light switch off, run over, hop in bed, pull up the covers before the room gets dark. And Satchel's like, Cool, you fast, but you ain't that fast. And so Cool Papa Bell bet his meal money. And Satchel took the bait. And because that light switch had a shortage in it, Cool was able to flip that light switch off, run over, hop in bed, cover up before the room went completely dark. Satchel was so outdone that he just always told folks that Cool was that fast. And so the two of them had such an amazing relationship together. They got themselves in a world of difficulty all the time, playing down in the Dominican Republic in a situation. You know, Joel, you hear these stories about do or die in playoff situations, Game 7, do or die. Well, when Satchel and Cool and Josh and Leroy Matlock go down to the Dominican, they literally had a do or die because they're playing for the sinister dictator, Rafael Trujillo. And he had brought them down because they needed to win the championship for him. And if they don't win this championship, they likely don't get back off the islands. So it was literally do or die for Cool, Satchel, and Josh when they went down to the Dominican in 1937. Fortunately, they won that game and got back home.
It's great stuff. I could listen to these all day. I have listened to these all day. You got me now thinking about other players like the great Cuban with the nickname El Maestro.
One of the greatest players of all time, and unfortunately, not a lot of fans know who he is. On the field of legends here at the Negro Leagues Museum, he's standing at the plate. Stood about 6'3", 6'4", movie star, good looks, played every position on the diamond. We're talking about the great Martin Dihigo. Nicknamed him El Maestro, the master, because he could do it all, literally. As I mentioned, played all 9 positions, played all 9 of them well. He is the only baseball player in the history of our sport to be enshrined into 5 different countries' baseball halls of fame. He's in the Mexican, Cuban, Venezuelan, Dominican, and in Cooperstown. Joe, one year in the Mexican League, Dihigo wins the pitching title. He goes 19-2 with an 0.90 ERA. The sucker hits 387 that same season and won the batting title. Yeah, that don't make no sense now. And yet there are so many baseball fans who have no idea who the great Martin Dihigo is, but you should know. And thankfully, we have a museum like this one so that you can get to know about these legendary ball players of yesteryear, or as I like to refer to them as baseball's unsung heroes. And they should be celebrated. And that's the role of the Negro Leagues Museum. It has been for 30 years. When we started this museum in a one-room office about a fraction of the size of my office here, with a hope and a dream that we could one day build a facility that would pay rightful tribute to not only one of the great chapters in baseball history, but one of the great chapters in American history. Here we are now 30 years later, recognized as America's National Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. So it's something that we are all tremendously proud of. And as much work as we've done, there's still that much more work left to be done. And so we encourage everybody who's listening to consider supporting the work of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum so that the legacy of the Negro Leagues will continue to play on long after there are no other Negro Leaguers alive to attest to how great these leagues were.
And we certainly will see all of those names, or so many of those names now, listed on the same statistical sheets as the major league ball players, their contemporaries, many of whom they often beat on those barnstorming tours. So, Bob, as we wrap it up here, I want to ask you about 2021, because I know the way your mind works, it never stops in terms of creating. That marketing side of you is always coming up with the next idea. That's what you were doing the moment you became president. You were immediately planning an event that had to be done quickly. And so there's always something between birthdays and anniversaries and recognition and honoring those that we have lost. What does 2021 look like?
Well, a lot of hope, a lot of promise. And we are preparing, as I mentioned, the announcement on Wednesday gives us great momentum going into 2021 as we get ready and get prepared to roll out our Negro Leagues 101 celebration. And I always kind of half-heartedly joke about the fact, for those of us who may have gone to college, the 101 courses were the only ones that I passed. Yeah, they were the grade point boosters, because once we got to 300 and 400 level, man, I was in trouble. And so I relied on those 101 courses. But next year, we're going to create essentially a year-long college course of elementary information that we will disseminate in all kinds of ways. We're looking at 2 virtual reality experiences. We will be creating other virtual platforms. We will be engaging other communities to do research and share that research about Black baseball in their communities. And our job is to hopefully find a expansive way to educate people about the history of the Negro Leagues in a elementary kind of fashion. And so we'll use that platform and continue to build on the momentum. Some really exciting things coming in 2021. As I mentioned to you earlier, we just opened our new Barrier Breaker exhibit, finished that now. And it is an absolute gorgeous exhibition that celebrates all the players who broke their respective major league teams' color barriers, from Jackie Robinson in 1947 through Pumpsie Green being the last to complete the integration cycle 12 years later with the Boston Red Sox in 1959. And it shines a needed spotlight on the other players who endured just as much as Jackie, but have never really been talked about in the same vein. And so we're telling that story. And then we also tell the story of what set the stage for integration in baseball, and that was World War II. And so that exhibit is now complete. So if you are able to come by and visit the museum, you'll want to come by and check it out. It is absolutely fascinating and it is pertinent, but we're excited about 2021. A lot of momentum going into the new year, and it'll be a lot of buildup as we go through Buck O'Neill's 110th birthday at the end of the year. And if the stars align, Buck will be on the ballot for consideration for the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And maybe we'll get some good news before 2021 ends that our friend Buck O'Neill will at long last take his place amongst the greats of baseball by being recognized in the National Baseball Hall of Fame, which will then give us an opportunity to plan an incredible Buck O'Neill Hall of Fame celebration in 2022, coincidentally, the same time that the commemorative coin will come out. So I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but, in my role, you got to be thinking about these things because, you want to, number one, you want to take full advantage of every opportunity that comes your way.
That was going to be my last question about Buck, and all I will say is that it's hard to imagine anyone wanting anything but Buck O'Neill being in the Hall of Fame, and maybe just some perfection in it happening in the year 22 to honor number 22, Buck O'Neil. So we'll see what happens with
Kind of
that.
poetic, Joe.
It is poignant. I know you have to have thought of that already because that's the way that your mind works. But in this year of so much adversity, I'm reminded, Bob, that the Negro Leaguers were dealing with adversity and overcoming it and finding new ways from back in 1920 and really before that. So in many ways, all these pivots that you had with the museum really stand for what those Negro Leaguers are about. Find a different way. And what could have been such an awful year and has been such a difficult year for so many ended up being a bright spot, I believe, for the Negro Leagues, channeling the spirit of so many that came before.
That's it. You know, the story of the Negro Leagues is about making a way when there seemingly is no way. And we try to embody that spirit. And we've been very fortunate and very blessed to have been able to at least weather this part of the storm. We still don't know what's in store for 2021 as it relates to this crazy virus that we've all been dealing with. But again, we've got to think that things are going to be better. And so I couldn't be more prouder of this organization and my teammates here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum who lay it on the line every single day, man, to make this museum work. You know, I'm kind of the front man and I get a lot of attention, probably more than I absolutely deserve. But the people that I work with behind the scenes do an amazing job. And they're just a special bunch of people to work with. I couldn't think of a better group of people to work with. And we all believe in each other, and they certainly believe in me. And it motivates me every single day to keep on keeping on, to try to do the best job so that we can build the best museum that we possibly can.
Well, if you're watching us and you're in the Kansas City area and you have not been to the museum, no time like the present. I don't know what took so long, but that's okay. There's always an open door. Well, at least within normal business hours. Just bring a mask in, and it's really easy to register. Get online. It's safe. Great protocols there right now. If you've already been before, I don't need to tell you that you'll enjoy coming back. And if you're out of town, Bob, I tell people all the time, come on down, visit the museum, maybe take a break and go down the street for some barbecue, and then come on back and see more. It's a must stop. It is the number one stop. And then you knock out the barbecue, which is another number one stop in Kansas City, and you could do it all in one day.
Yeah. No, it's I couldn't have said it better, you know, and that's the way a lot of people, when they come, they do it. You know, they'll spend, because you can lose yourself here. You really can.
Oh, easily.
And, yeah, no, you know, I mean, you can go through at your own pace, but if this is something that you kind of really have a passion for, you can lose yourself here. The footprint is small. It's 10,000 square feet. But man, within those 10,000 square feet is a lot of information. And we've got some more exciting news to come about two really special collections that we have just acquired. And I can't wait to tell y'all about it, but I can't tell you just yet. So stay tuned for that because it's going to bring some exciting new items for display here at the museum and an opportunity for us to tell some new stories relative to what's in part of both of these collections.
Well, can't wait to hear about it. Congratulations on what ended up turning into a very successful year in the midst of so much going on in this world on many fronts. It's been done many, many times before, but I will tip this cap, the 1942 version of the Kansas City Monarchs. And it doesn't have to be Kansas City when you go through that gift shop. They've got all the teams that played. So whether it's Philadelphia or Chicago or Atlanta or Birmingham or the Homestead Grays, whoever it is, that's definitely a highlight as you're walking out of the museum. I can't promote the museum anymore, although, well, I could actually, but just check them out online, come visit, and I guarantee you everybody will love it. But most importantly for today, Bob, congratulations on a successful 2020 amidst adversity and on this groundbreaking news last Wednesday to honor these Negro Leaguers who, as you said, didn't need the validation, but are now standing there side by side with their major league contemporaries being recognized for the stats and the legacy that they've always had. I appreciate you spending the time today. And now I instruct you to take a break until you have to do the next one, which probably will be really soon.
Well, first of all, my friend, I want to thank you for everything that you continue to do in support of me and this museum. You know, obviously, you've got a legion of fans here. And I do want to remind everybody that now our broadcasting friend has moved into the book writing business. And be sure to get this book called Small Ball, Big Results. He even gave me a chapter, and I got a couple of photos in there. So please pick this up. It is a wonderful read, and it talks about business and life and how the small things lead up to winning. And we know all about small ball here at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum because it is what Rube Foster preached. And he won a lot of games playing what people call small ball. I don't call it small ball. I call it winning baseball. And that's what this book is all about. It is the formula for winning at business and life. And Joe, congratulations, man, on penning your first book. I would imagine that there's some more to follow.
there might be, and not yet though. As you know, at some point you got to take a break. Thank you for that. You didn't have to do it, obviously, but it was such an honor for me as I wrote this book, and each chapter is a small ball topic. Each chapter is an inning, so there's a top half and a bottom half, and there's a baseball and a business story. And so there was a chapter on pivot. Honestly, though, Bob, I could have fit in the story of the Negro Leagues, which, by the way, it's only a handful of pages. I can't write like Joe Posnanski. I'm a TV guy, not a writer. However, the Negro League story could have fit in any one of these chapters of small ball topics, but we wrote about the pivot because the Negro Leaguers were pivoting from day one. And so that was certainly my honor to do that. It's more importantly, my honor to call you a friend, to be a friend of the museum. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to moderate and host this today. Congratulations on the news, and thanks so much for just spreading this legacy and these stories, because as we know, storytelling never goes away, and as long as there are the Bob Kendricks in this world to tell those stories, these stories will continue to be passed on. So congratulations to you, my friend.
Joe, thank you, and thanks everyone who tuned in. I hope you enjoyed our conversation, and stay tuned for more of these kinds of virtual conversations to come.
All right, so that is Bob Kendrick, president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum at 18th and Vine in Kansas City. My name is Joel Goldberg. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We hope to see you at the museum sometime sooner in the future. Stay safe, have a happy holidays, a happy new year, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.